Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to everyone here in Oxford. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all our friends and colleagues joining us online, wherever you all are. Welcome to this first seminar this term in our joint series on viewing multidimensional poverty from many angles, which we here in Oxford at the Department of International Development from the Oxford Poverty and Human Development Initiative are co-hosting together with our friends and colleagues at the Human Development Report Office at UNDP in New York and the Institute for International Economic Policy at George Washington University in Washington. Also, on behalf of all the other co-organizers, a very warm welcome to all of you. And thanks to all colleagues at OPHI, IIEP, and HDRO who have worked so hard to make this series possible. In this seminar series, for those of you who are joining us today for the first time, we try to bring together exciting research and policy applications around multidimensional poverty measurement. And there would not be a better way to start this term and this new iteration of our joint series than with a very special, very policy-centered presentation that we are very privileged to be hearing today from two very distinguished colleagues joining us today from Nigeria. Those of you here in the room can see we have a large Nigerian delegation with us, a high-level policy delegation who are working on the Nigerian Multidimensional Poverty Index and how to use it to reduce poverty in Nigeria. And the distinguished colleagues who will present to us today is representing Prince Adeyemi Adeniran, the CEO of the National Bureau of Statistics and the Statistician-General of the Federation, Mr. Adeyeye Akinloye Elutade, the head of the Household Statistics Division at the National Bureau of Statistics, Nigeria, and Ms. Sola Afolayan, who works at the presidency in Nigeria and is also the national coordinator of the Multidimensional Poverty Index. The two of them will tell us about the journey that Nigeria has gone through from the inception of their Multidimensional Poverty Index to now using it for policy making. Before I hand over to our two speakers, just a few housekeeping announcements. The seminar is going to be recorded, so anything online colleagues and colleagues here in the room are saying is going to be on the recording. Also, especially for colleagues and friends here in the room, we have two microphones at the ceiling, and they're very sensitive. So if you're gossiping in the back, everyone online will hear you, and it will be on the recording. So be mindful of that. We will have time for question and answers after the two presentations from our distinguished speakers today. If you're joining us online, please just put your questions into the Q&A box, and then we'll be able to feed them to our speakers or also allow you to unmute and ask them directly. Likewise, here in the room after the presentations, please just make yourselves visible, wave at us frantically, and we'll be able to allow you to ask your questions and interact with our speakers. So, without any further ado, I first hand over to Ms. Sola Afolayan, the National Coordinator for the Nigerian Multidimensional Poverty Index. Over to you, Sola.
Thank you, Jacob. So kind of you to introduce us well, and of course for the support that OPHI continues to offer to the Nigeria goal, and so thank you very much for that. A bit of reminiscing on, I think about 2 years ago we were here, just the same room, and we're thinking about how we are going to implement the MPI in Nigeria. It was just an idea, it was some conversation. We hadn't developed or adopted what the dimensions were going to be, or neither even the indicators. And so we were quite ambitious. Well, here we are today. We have launched the first sub-national MPI in Nigeria. And by the way, that is not the first MPI that we have done in Nigeria. We have done another one before, but it was a subsumed minor survey that was done in a bigger version. Within a bigger survey, the HD Human Development Survey. But we thought that for us to address multidimensional poverty in Nigeria, just like we found in the report, Then it would be better for us to do it at sub-national to capture the sub-national. And of course, discussion started, and here we are. So I'm going to speak on very likely on what the results are, and I will let my colleague at the National Bureau of Statistics go into the details around data. And also it's going to show us a view of video on the field where people went out to capture the realities of poverty and spoken by the people themselves. So again, my name is Sola Afolayan. I work at the presidency and I've done several work in terms of perception work. I'm very keen and committed to reducing poverty in Nigeria, contributing my own quota to reducing poverty in Nigeria. There are two dimensions when you look at when you want to measure poverty. So you look at the monetary calculation for poverty, and also then the multidimensional poverty index, which is now being deployed in Nigeria. You see the UNDP champions the MPI in terms of multilateral organization, while the IMF and also the World Bank does a lot of work in terms of the monetary. Interestingly, also the World Bank is looking at the multidimensional way of measuring poverty, and they call theirs a multidimensional poverty measurement, the MPM, and it's very quite aligned with the MPI. In fact, they reference a lot the MPI methodology for their work. So what are the results that we have captured in Nigeria? And so we found that of the 11 million Nigerians that we have currently, of the population, we have about 133 million that are multidimensionally poor. And that's quite alarming if you look at that. But let me go back to my earlier slide. We can see that it's 82.9 million that are monetary poor. But look at the dates when the data was captured. That was 2018, 2019. So we don't have the latest data. And we can assume also that that will probably go up given the pandemic that happened in 2020 and some other economic crisis that globally that did occur. So yeah, so what does the results for that tell us? 72% of these 133 million live in rural areas. And so it was a good idea that we did the survey, conducted a survey at sub-national level. So a bit to mention what it is, I would say the governance structure in Nigeria. So you have the national, the federal, and then you have the state. So within the state, we have 36 states plus the federal capital territory. The federal capital territory is where the seat of government is, and we count it as one of the states. Within the state, we have senatorial districts, and that is 109 senatorial districts. Within the senatorial districts are what we call the local government areas, where there are 774 local government areas. And then further, we have wards. But we only stopped in terms of the survey for the 2022 MPI, we stopped at the senatorial districts. So we went to 109 senatorial districts, almost 109 senatorial districts, because there was a particular state, Borno State, because of the insurgency issues in the state, we couldn't cover all of the senatorial districts. But I can say nearly all the 109 senatorial districts were captured within this survey. So then you can see when we have the results segregated and analyzed, and it shows us that 72% of these 1.3 million people are those that make up the multidimensionally poor population. Nonetheless, when you look at the details of the results, even though we say 42% live in the urban areas, the deprivation that they face in terms of the dimensions in health and education is quite similar. And so we have 65% living in the north and the south. So aside the federal, the state, and also having the senatorial district and LGA, we also have the categorization of region. So we have the south and the north, just broadly. But then you have within the south, we have the south-south, southeast, and southwest. Yeah, and then within the north, we have the northeast, northwest, and north central. And so we have the 6 regions. So when you group all the three northeast, northwest, and north central into one, you have them making up 65% of those that are poor. Of this 133 million, 65% of those 133 million live in the north. So that's about 86 million. So it's quite a revealing statistics. So I'll just run quickly through those people that are up there for everyone to see. We looked at people living with disabilities within households. We look at child poverty. So child poverty is quite interesting because we work closely with UNICEF. UNICEF is the voice when it comes to championing the causes for children. So they contributed in selecting the indicators, and they were keen to see not just bundling the national MPF, but also separating and looking very closely at what the multidimensional way children are deprived. So we have like a standalone, but it's subsumed within the national MPI, what we call the child MPI, and it's quite a revealing. It talks about children that are out of school, disaggregated by girls and boys. It tells about even the kind of poverty that they face, those that get into early marriages, because that's quite a menace in Nigeria. Okay, so another interesting finding that we got was in terms of the cooking fuel. In Nigeria, we never ever thought that we'd have over 100 million people cooking with cow dung, wood, or charcoal, because you can see, and that's why MPI is quite good. The structures are all there, the buildings, the infrastructures, but you never imagine that within those structures, you have people living within the urban areas that are poor. Even within the rural areas, you have the poorest of the poor. So over 100 Nigerians are cooking with cow dung or wood or charcoal. And you can talk about the impact in terms of climate change. It's quite alarming. And of course, we have deprivations in sanitation, some disaggregations around the region, even the senatorial district. So all those results are results that would highlight in the next presentation. I would like to talk through the journey that we've had. Like I said at my opening, we never thought 2 years ago when we were making our presentation, it was, this is what we want to do, this is our intention about Nigeria. And here we are today talking about what the results are. So the milestone has been not a snail walk, but something that we are quite proud of. And so the delegation that is also attending this seminar, we have high-level policy influencers and makers that are in Oxford to learn how to push forward the policy use of the result that we have. So I think it was when the government, because we had the present administration had the second term coming like in 2019, but prior to that, we had a publication out there that said Nigeria was the poverty capital of the world. And we were quite surprised given the investment that the government had put in the first term, that the government launched the biggest in terms of volume and also impact in social protection. We have the most robust school feeding program in the entire world, where UNICEF World Food Program actually send people from other countries to come and learn from Nigeria. But so it was quite alarming, to see the results still come back and say, in terms of out-of-school children, Nigeria is still performing the worst, and vis-a-vis population, irrespective of that. And also looking at the investment in terms of the 500 billion naira. I don't know what that translates to in terms of pounds. The investment that was done annually in the last 4 years prior to the release of the report that Nigeria was spending to address social protection work. We're doing cash transfer, we're doing a lot of targeting of household poverty reduction strategies. So we then thought, so what is the method that was used to analyze that Nigeria was the poorest or the poverty capital of the world? We engaged these people, and then we saw that they needed more data because it was outdated information, and also It was also a subjective calculation. So one of the things that they used was to look at a nighttime projection, where if the beam lights a particular place and they look at it and say, oh, people don't have electricity in those areas, that means they are poor. But it's not exactly entirely true when it comes to the context of Nigeria, right? Because some areas where you think it should be only for residential areas are actually places where you have offices where there are quite operations. So those places are usually dark at night. And of course, we have issues around electricity in Nigeria. We can't doubt that, but it wasn't exactly. And then another thing is they looked at the number of times where if I pick my call, how long do I stay on the call for? So if I'm someone that we call it flashing in Nigeria, you just beep someone and you quickly call the call so that you want the person to call you back. So the profile individual, they work with the network providers, the communication network providers, and then they profile a few people and they say, oh, that means these people are quite poor. No, but they could be students, and then they have all of this mobile network, had some offers that they were giving at the time. So it was quite subjective. So we said, you are out there making a lot of, and people are picking up the buzz and the news. How can we help you to get correct data on the field? And we began to talk with the MBS. The MBS is the National Bureau of Statistics, and is the government official platform where you get the official data. They conduct the survey, they disseminate what the results are. So a bit of background on that. So those conversations started in 2018, 2017. And of course, in 2019, we began to really push forward. The OPHI coordinates side events, high-level side events at the United Nations General Assembly. And we've been part of that since 2019. And prior to that, we have always been, participating, but that commitment to implement the MPI came out of the UNGA 2019. And we make a few commitments. The commitment was to make sure that we do a sub-national, not just national, but a sub-national survey. And we are going to make sure that that consultation is carried across all of the stakeholders at the presidency, at the state level, and the key stakeholder MDAs. MDAs are the ministries, departments, and agencies that we needed to engage. And you see me later on talk about all of them that we have thus far engaged. And of course, the dimensions and the indicators, it was quite a rigorous process. It took us almost a year to arrive at the indicators because a lot of consultations needed to happen for us to arrive, because we don't want to change every year, every time we do the surveys, change the indicators and the dimensions. Nigeria has, I can't quite remember quite exactly the percentage of the youth in Nigeria, but there's a big problem there because of unemployment amongst the youth. So we were keen to include, because we have the global MPI, and then this is the national MPI that we have developed. Nigeria was keen to include unemployment, to look at it, and then to track it over time, the changes that has happened as a result of that. So that was one thing that we included. The other part that we included in the dimension was the issue of insecurity in Nigeria, because it was quite impacting economic activities and growth. So we wanted to see what the interventions that are being done, and just to track the escape from poverty over time. And of course, the milestone number 3 would be sustainability strategy. Even though we hadn't conducted the survey at the time, we were already anticipating, because there were a lot of things that would happen, that would meet even upfront. So we needed to begin to engage. So we were part of the policy team that were developing the national plans. So we have the national plan 2021 to 2025, 2030, and then the 2050 also, and some other sub-national plans in terms of the sectoral plans that we have included the MPI as a monitoring tool, and it was adopted and signed by the president. And that was just even before we even conducted the launch. in 2022, before the launch also, we were thinking whether we wanted the president to launch the MPI report at UNGA 2022. So what we did this time around that is different was to co-host the MPPN. The MPPN is the network of the countries that implement the MPI. So Nigeria co-hosted the session for the very first time in September last year. The president was there, well represented. And thereafter, we launched the very first subnational survey, MPI survey in Nigeria. So what we thought to do differently is, we know that the Bureau of Statistics they conduct the survey, they release the survey, and they attempt to disseminate the survey the best way they can. But we wanted the people to know what the data means, because you can have very high level data and it's not understood by ordinary Nigerians. So what we did, we now developed what we call the poverty dashboard situation room and also the national poverty map. The poverty map shows the MPI 2022 report. I will show there is a link, there's a QR code that you can just point the phone and then you get to the poverty map shortly. So the poverty map, shows very graphically in a exciting, engaging way where the people can easily understand, drill down what the result of the 2022 project, 2022 MPI result was. The poverty dashboard situation room, for the very first time we are having that, where people, researchers, stakeholders, different stakeholders, policy makers can come together and have conversations around poverty. Because we want to, make sure that conversation gets going all the time. It's not, overtaken by a lot of activities, and then culminating in what we call the national roundtable around poverty, which we are going to carry out this year. So what are the ongoing strategies that we have implemented and is still also ongoing? I must first acknowledge that a lot of this work that we have done has been because of the support that we have from OPHI. Beyond that, also for countries that have implemented this before Nigeria. I recall when I visited Mexico in 2019, because they had implemented years at the time. We also have support from India. India has, started I think they started their own implementation in 2020. Even though we had started the conversation, but they went on quite strongly in implementing that. So we have a lot being coaching and mentorship from India. So we have like about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 strategy, just very broadly. We have the data, the dialogue and partnerships that's going on. We have the capacity building, one of the reasons why we have policy influencers here in Oxford currently. And there are project designs that we were thinking about. And very key, very important also in terms of the resource allocation. Now that we have the results, this is what the results say. How do we make sure that we have the result influences how budget is allocated? Because that's how we have to address all of this, right? And then the policy action, some of them could be executive bills, so all of the policy actions and activities are what I categorize under that. So I could just quickly run through a few of these. In terms of dialogue and partnership, you see the SDG Private Sector Advisory Group. This is a very well-established private sector group. For sustainability, for any project, in terms of even for governance, you have to include the private sector. So within the private sector, and of course, there is SDG 1 that we are trying to address when we look at multidimensional poverty, we're building it in all of its form. And which better partner to have than to have the SDG impact. The MPI is actually a subsumed activity under the SDG. So we are leveraging on the private sector advisory group within the SDG. Interestingly, for the resource allocation, so we have the governance structure that will show very shortly. 2023 budget was already being planned even before we launched the MPI report. And we had the Honorable Minister of State, Budget and Planning as one also part of the coordinators for the budget cycle for Nigeria, for the budget process. So he has seen the result. I think the result has been ready since May, June. And we're reviewing, training a few key stakeholders and doing some deliberations. So he was quite aware and he was able to influence and say, make justification, data-based, evidence-based justification how the resource allocation for 2023 budget should look. And I can proudly say that the top 5 sectors that got the highest allocation for 2023 is quite aligned with the result that we have for in the MPI report. Nigeria is quite, we have 36 states and it's in transition in terms of the change of government. So we were quite targeted in looking at which state is not going to go through this transition in turbulent manner where we can know that some states, some of the governors are going to return. So we have started working in 6 states and doing quite a lot of detailed work, which I'm going to show shortly. A lot of policy actions there. I leave my slides and you can read through that. Now, this is the governance structure. We have established the steering committee already. The first meeting was held in 2021, where the vice president had chaired the meeting. We had the Honorable Minister of State, Budget and Planning make presentation at the meeting. We had special invitation from the former president, is it Prime Minister of Colombia, His Excellency Santos. He also had a guest appearance at the meeting, and all these are all the members that they are also attended in terms of Nigeria. We also had a represented the United Nations. We had all of the partners, the key partners that everyone can know. The technical working group is being developed, but we have the very active ones being the presidency, OPHI is very active, and the MBS, the NASCO, and of course, the National Bureau of Statistics, the Budget Office, UNDP, UNICEF. Now is when we are really keen to engage one of our key partners, which is the Office of the Special Advisor to the President on the SDGs. And we have a representative at this week, going through all of the discussions, the policies of the result. Now, and this is the national visions. There's another vision in terms of the state level, dissemination and youth. For national, we have the multi-sectoral action committee, and they will be developing the multi-sectoral project that is ready for basket funding. And then you have a suite of projects that will be on that. One of the key things that, of course, we have taken out from this week is to develop a state reform action plan, because it's not just a federal, the real change, just like we've seen, the rural areas come under the jurisdiction of the state. And so the state reform action plan is the key thing. It's really to however, at national, we have the dimensions, the sectors, and that's why we have all of the members, ministers that are part of the conversation. Like I've rightly said, energy, clean cooking, the key issue. We have the child poverty, the budgeting issue. There is a gap within the report that we have around gender. We did quite do a lot of capturing to do gender. We have results around gendered household, but not not fully disaggregated data on gender. So that is something that we are looking to populate over time. There's the importance of engaging, regional support or regional activities, deploy regional activities. Like I mentioned, we have the North having the most impacted or deprived people. And then, of course, even in the South, there are the peculiarities of the deprivations that they face, which, of course, they began helping working with the regional commissions. One of them is the NDDC. NDDC is the Niger Delta Development Commission, where one of the states within it is the second poorest in Nigeria. This just highlights in a more detailed version what the data is, what the goal of what we want to address, what the proposal and the kind of partner that we work with, not quite high level. So, so if you point your phone camera, you will be able to download our report for 2022 and also directly go straight to see the Nigeria poverty map that I spoke about. But this is the landing page for the Nigeria poverty map. So, yeah, thank you for listening, and I'm open to Okay, nice. So I think the process is out. Call on my colleague that is representing the Statistician-General, Mr. Elutade, to come make his presentation. Maybe thereafter would have a set of questions or feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation. But she has, let me just say that she has even said it all. But I still just have to say one or two things. And as you can see, I don't have any particular presentation to reject, but just let me. So it's a pleasure for me to be here this evening to because on how far we have gone with the MPI in Nigeria, and to be talking on the data production point of it, looking at some background as to how we produce the latest MPI statistics in Nigeria. Just as she said, this actually is not the first MPI to be produced in Nigeria. We have been doing it before, till 2018, but we have been doing it as a component under the UNDP Human Development Index survey. But this time around, we are now doing it as a stand-alone MPI survey. And what actually happened at what is the present government, when they came back second term, one of their policy was to see how they can move 100 million people out of poverty. And we thought of it and appreciate that the only survey that can be used, that can address this situation, is the Multidimensional Poverty Index survey. And with the lesson learned or the records that recorded by some countries that were doing it before, like Mexico and Colombia. So we thought that the best thing for us is to adopt the MPI. So we came up with it, and with the support of OPHI, UNDP, NASCO, and some other relevant stakeholders, with MBS being the implementing agency, we conducted the first round of multi-dimensional poverty survey. This survey, when looking at the history of data production in Nigeria, stands to be the largest survey so far, looking at 56,610 households. We have never had up to this sample size in the history of any survey in the past. And the structure of the dimensions and indicators, just as we have it in the national MPI, the Earth, education, living standard, work, and shock. Then in Nigeria, what we did is to adopt multi-dimensional poverty index. That was adopted. And the dimension that we look at under that is child development with some indicators under it. And some of the indicators we are looking under that is birth attendance, playground, child engagement, child care, down to immunization. So, coupled with other indicators from the national MPI. So, for the Nigerian MPI statistics, just as it has been rightly said, we have 63% of people in Nigeria that are living in poverty, that are multidimensionally poor. And this translated to 133 million Nigerians. Actually, the challenge we had initially, the policy of government is to lift 100 out of poverty. And you are now talking of 133 now that are inside that poverty. But that's just the truth of it. And that's one of the beauty of MPI. It will give it to you exactly the way it is. And that's one of the reasons why they could not argue, it. That is why it just has to be accepted. And if not the, let me put it, integrity of MPI, it would have been easy for any government agency to come up at this particular moment and say you are releasing this type of data. And if we look at the total number of people that we say are poor in Nigeria, the major contributor indicator is this cooking fuel, just as she said, is cooking fuel, and followed by the sanitation. And if you now look at this, break it down at sectoral sections, you see that urban contributed more, which means that the total number of poor people in Nigeria, majority of them are from urban. And you can as well relate it to this indicator now. We are looking at cooking fuel. We agree with sanitation. We agree with me that this issue of cooking fuel, and we are looking at cow dung, firewood, coal. Those are mostly, rural areas. And when you are talking of sanitation, maybe people using open defecation and other things, you see that mostly they are in rural area. So you can easily relate this indicator with the sector aspects of it. That's rural. Then the MPI can be broken down by sector, just as I've said. And so far from data standpoint, the data has been made, produced, made available to the policymakers. So what I'm trying to say is that I will not be going too deep into data per se. The data has been launched and it's already available in the website, so people can easily check the website and see exactly what the data is saying. So my assignment is just to briefly give us the summary of how far we have done in the country, because she has been dealt with it. And thank you so much. That's it.
Thank you very much to our two speakers, Sola and Elutade. We now have some time for questions from the online audience. If you have any, please just use the raise your hand function on Zoom or put your questions into the Q&A box and we'll be able to take them here. And of course, also everyone here in the room. Any questions, follow-up comments, anything that you would like the speakers to elaborate on or comment on, just raise your hand and then we can take your questions. Yes, please.
Okay, my first question is for Sola. I'm happy you said you've started the process of dialoguing with states that are not likely to witness transition in terms of political power. So when they were confronted with your data, what were their specific concerns? How were you able to address them? How do you intend to use experiences from those states to manage other remaining states?
Okay, so thank you. So I'll just, did you hear the question? Nice. The camera, I think the speaker is quite sensitive. Okay, so one of the states is Ondo State, and you would know that Ondo State appears to be the least. But that's why it is multidimensional way we should approach analysis. Yeah. So Ondo State reached out to us and said, even though everyone is, oh, Ondo State is the least poor in Nigeria, but look at what it is in terms of climate change. You know, Ondo sits within the Niger Delta region and also within the Southwest. So they're also impacted by the leakages because of fuel and then electricity. Of course, they did well in terms of health, in education, but they were quite low in some other living standards indicators. So what the governor did say is that we should sit with the one of the ministries, which is the planning ministry, and say every year we have a planning committee consisting of all of the commissioners, especially the planning, the Commission of Finance and stuff, so that we can look at how to prioritize. And also because they wanted to launch some big projects around clean energy, they said they must include the collaborations that we're having with the Presidential Energy Transition Plan team, because they have a robust plan that is being deployed in Nigeria as we speak. So we wanted to make sure that all of the plans, maybe it's wash, nutrition, health, education, that is being done at state, at federal level, even around child poverty. How can we disseminate and include states so that state is including that in their reforms and in their documents for implementation? So that's just one sample of the state. I must confess that it's just about 3 states that is not going to fully go through this transition because they've had their election prior or they will have theirs later. Another one that we have engaged with is Kogi State, even though they are going to have their election next year, not this year, when that is going to happen. Yeah, so everyone is looking at what are the results, what is the result saying, and which of the areas that we should focus on. But another state that came out quite surprising to us was Kaduna. We didn't expect Kaduna, given the proactiveness of the governor, the investment that has been done in the states, and the result that came out. You could see that in terms of population and the impact on the people, Kaduna came almost like 3rd or 2nd, you know, after Kano. Then you see Kaduna. It was quite surprising. So he wanted to know, because when we wanted to start, we visited the OPHI leadership team visited, and so I want to be able to compare, you know, in comparable states. What is the MPI for Kaduna, for Kano, for Rivers State, and for Lagos? He said he really wants to know because he wants to compete and compare, and that is the healthy competition we want to see. So it was quite alarming for him to see that. So he sent us the Statistician-General, he sent us the ministry, the Commission of Finance, that is there, the Commission of Planning, he sent us the woman, you know, all of the key ministers, and also his chief of staff to sit with us. And then, of course, with the party's gubernatorial candidate to map out his policy strategy to address all of those. So that's just what we have done so far. But for the other 3, we are working through UNICEF because there are child dimensions. We are mapping all of the policy areas that are gaps to, you know, that the House of Assembly have not signed on to, in terms of out-of-school children, early marriages, so that from the legislative process, if that is done, then it will get back to allocations of resources to address those issues. So that's what we have done so far. Since the release of the result.
No, I just wanted to add to your comments. I think one of the things Kaduna wanted to do, we did the social protection policy for Nigeria, and surprisingly, those states you called were the first 6 IGR states. So maybe that's why the governor wanted to say, in terms of IGR, how come Lagos is doing better? Something like that.
Yeah.
It's just more of a comment.
Yeah, it's for the comparison. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, no, sir. What?
Any other questions or comments for the speakers?
I think in one of the first slides, you showed that there were more people who were multidimensionally poor compared to marginally poor. So I was curious to know whether you had an idea as to why that was the case and what were the dimensions in which they lacked.
Okay, so for the very first time, we looked at beyond monetary poor, because people would count myself and a few other people as deprived or poor because I have some cash in my account. But in Nigeria, if we make an illustration that one is one step away from falling into poverty in terms of health. So I could have the cash ready, but the distance between where I live and to access the kind of health facility, the quality of health attention that I need is not there. So I am deprived. The second thing is you look at it, you have some savings and your health insurance is not covering, the illnesses like cancer. So you see people that are quite comfortable and then all of a sudden they are selling their assets and then they fall into poverty. So people are actually poor when you don't have access to quality healthcare. And interestingly, we also mapped the primary healthcare centers. We have a lot of them in Nigeria because politicians are, the electorate like to see physical structures. So you have them beautifully built but locked up. You don't have the equipment, facilities and the equipment there. They are not, the manpower is not there. So what's the point? So all of those places are there, but people can't access why the primary healthcare centers are built. So I would, to respond to your question directly, why it is different is because for the first time we are looking at, we are interpreting poverty in a different way. And after the results, some people will say, oh no, I'm not poor. Why you say 133 million people are poor? That means I am poor. So, but you need to look at it quite differently because this is the basic amenities that you should have access to. Your child should be able to go to school. You should be able to go to a healthcare center and get treated and have access to good water supply and stuff. So that's that dimension that we make people. So it's also mindset change, behavioral change, and attitudinal change of even the citizens themselves. I hope that helps.
Okay, let me just add. Say, for example, an average nomad of North, looking at the number of cattle he has, when you evaluate it, he is extremely rich. But when you see the deprivation within the household, children don't go to school. His spouses don't have access to healthcare. They would have, even antenatal, they don't go. Looking at their living condition, that is their shelter, where they live. In short, they now fall within the poor or the poorest, because those cattle, they don't use it for their own benefit. They look at it as an asset, and the asset that they don't dispose it for their uplifting their livelihood. So those kind of things are also contributed to the North. Then the state governors, sometimes they are surprised, but most of their intervention are within the state capital. They don't trickle down to the rural communities. Meanwhile, our sample selection is random, both rural and urban. And the rural population or the sample enrollment area of the rural, because they are more in number, they happen to have the larger share of the sample size. So they shouldn't be surprised. Let them spread their developmental project to the rural community.
That's
and
right.
we see a change in the near future.
That's right. Thank you.
Okay, that will take me to my next question. Maybe some clarification if I'm confused or I didn't get something clearly. I remember asset is an indicator. I remember reading asset is an indicator under works and shocks dimension, right?
Living standard.
Living standards. Under living standard. Okay, and then the definition of asset is owning a car, if I'm right.
Household characteristics.
No, what's the question?
The question is considering in a household, I think I remember reading something like that. At least one person in a house owner. Should we consider car as an asset, especially when we want to look at climate change, climate greenhouse emissions, and should car, because in the north, cattle are asset, and you can actually use cattle to get more income, right? In the north, by selling milk. So
in terms of we can give you access to all the list of the indicators, but beyond the indicators are the questionnaires. Yes, to look at a list of assets that we use to calculate and say, do you have it? Because there are some rural areas you never see a car. Does not mean that just like we have someone that mentioned and say a particular set of people, the number of cows that they have, is really reflective of their economic status. Yeah, in the community. However, we know the global standard of living that should be. So if you have 12 people living in a tattered hut, you understand the cooking within that, what that it impacts the health and a lot of other. So those are the indices just globally that just in the standardized manner that we check out. You have questions online?
Yeah, we have one question online from Rui Au. I hope I pronounced this more or less correctly. And the question is, I think on the monetary poverty results in Nigeria, I'm not sure how familiar you are with those, but the question is, do the results for monetary poverty also include incomes from illicit activities or services provided by criminal organizations?
Sorry, say that again.
The results include incomes from illicit activities or services provided by criminal organizations.
Oh, okay, that's an interesting one. So the question is,
this is financial
results that we published, right?
include
Incomes from illicit activities or services provided by criminal organizations.
No, it doesn't.
no.
So let me quickly say. So let me quickly say, if you go to the OPHI website, which is ophi.org.uk, you see the methodology. I'll let Sabina do what she does best to talk about what the methodology is, but it's very robust and rigorous process, and we don't take into account at all the illicit income or activities of, in fact, because it's a survey, it's not going to meet individuals that are rich or going to bank accounts and stuff. Is letting the poor themselves tell us the deprivations that they face. What are the realities of poverty? So the questionnaire for it, which is open, which we share, is out there. So we are asking people, what is the distance that you need to you have to travel between your house to the next healthcare center? How much do you earn in your daily income? What exactly do you do within this household? How many kids are there? How many of them, go to school, are supposed to go to under 5 years? So all of those are the set of questions that we do. But we do not, maybe monetary data, but I'm sure that does not do that. So we do not at all, and it's not part of the methodology for us to capture the results for the MPI.
Even in every survey, we do normally capture because they are not legalized activities.
I think we have time for one last question, which goes to our colleague Alex.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I have a question, or I want to kind of ask if you could elaborate on the Multisectoral Action Committee, like who forms part, what is the plan, or how far are you sort of elaborate of the work that you intend or doing. I wasn't quite sure where you're at the moment.
Yeah, so our visit to Oxford is to actually broaden our understanding and approach around that. So it's a good question that we'll answer probably next year.
Okay.
But just the idea about that is bringing all of the key stakeholders together, you know, developing the consultative manner, what the way forward is. We've had the key personnel develop that, but you know, you need a buy-in and cooperation and ownership of every other stakeholder. So taking everyone through the rigorous process and just hearing the feedback is what the activity is. But that portion that I showed is to say this is the intention. This committee will do X, Y, Z, and these are the ideas around what their work would be going forward.
Thank you.
Fantastic. On that note, please everyone join me in thanking once again our thank you all for taking the time to coming here in person or joining us online via Zoom. As I mentioned initially, this is the first of our new iteration of the joint series together with HDRO and IIEP. So please do come back and join us in the next weeks this term, every Wednesday, 4 p.m. UK time, either here at the department, or if you found us today on Zoom, you'll probably also find us in the next weeks. Next Wednesday, we'll have colleagues from the United Nations Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia talking to us about optimized poverty reduction strategies. So that's going to be another fascinating talk, and please do come back online or in person. We look forward to continued discussions and conversations around multidimensional poverty with all of you.
That's
so
great.
with that, thank you from Oxford, and bye-bye.